Dr. Newman said Tim Russert collapsed while preparing for Meet the Press. Resuscitation was begun immediately, and the DC EMS arrived on the scene, and a full code was initiated, and he was transported to Sibley Memorial Hospital, where resuscitation efforts were continued, but to no avail. The cause of death is yet to be determined. An autopsy is being performed. Howard, I can't imagine anything that would be, if something like this is so utterly unpredictable and utterly unbelievable. The one unbelievable part about it, I suppose, was the first sentence of Dr. Newman's statement. Tim Russert collapsed while preparing for Meet the Press.
I'm sitting here in the bureau that Tim didn't build but presided over, like the benevolent dad, like the bureau chief that he was. I'm thinking about his family. I'm thinking about Maureen Orth, his lovely and incredibly accomplished wife, a great journalist. They loved each other passionately. Maureen had her own professional life that she pursued with great vigor. They were both incredibly dedicated to their child, Luke, who, as others have pointed out, Tim was able to see graduate from Boston College. They went over to Italy. Maureen and Luke are still there, I gather, and on their way back, but Tim came back early, as I said before, to begin preparing for Meet the Press. But the fact that they were in Italy reminds me of something I wanted to mention. I'm not Catholic, I'm Jewish, but I'll tell you, if I ever thought about being Catholic, Tim would be the best advertisement for that faith that there is. I happened to attend, almost sneak in, I would say, but attend a Real Fish Out of Water, which is the Al Smith dinner in New York, which is the big dinner of all the Irish Catholic Pauls in New York, which used to be, and to some extent still is synonymous with all politicians in New York. And they're all there in white tie, and Tim was in his element. And he took a double take when he saw me there, because I was just trying to cover a political story. Was not properly dressed, of course. And nobody could be more embracing and welcoming than Tim. He said, you know, we might try and bring you over, Feynman. You know, we might try and reel you in. And you know what? He would have been a great fisherman for his faith, to use the analogy on purpose. Obviously, his faith animated him in a way that people outside the city didn't necessarily understand. We talked about Buffalo, we talked about his family, we talked about his love of journalism. But in whatever way he expressed it, he was a very deeply devout Catholic. I think the structure of the church meant a tremendous amount to Tim. Tim was a guy of structure, loved his family, loved the bureau, loved the camaraderie of NBC, loved journalism and being part of the tribe of journalism. But I think the faith that he must have learned up in Buffalo from his parents, that he grew up in that Catholic community in Buffalo, meant everything to him and helped guide and focus him and keep him grounded in this city where way too many people pursue false gods. And Tim was the kind of guy who never pursued false gods. He pursued the real one.
Pat Buchanan, of one of our MSNBC and NBC political analysts, is with us as well.
That was a good introduction to Pat, I would say.
Yes. Pat, I have to ask, with all of his political background, with all of his experience, with his associations with Senator Moynihan, Governor Cuomo, and this almost uncanny, supernatural ability to retain information and organize it and call upon it whenever necessary, on the air or off. How did he wind up doing this as his life's work in television, as opposed to getting, say, somebody elected president of the United States?
Well, Tim was what you would call a transfer student. He worked for Governor Cuomo, and Pat Moynihan was enormously proud of it. And Tim was a real student. I come over here sometimes, Keith, on Saturdays and do a little hit in the morning, and I'd often run into Tim, and he had his old clothes on, and he was coming out, and he was smiling. He was a Catholic kid who had done his homework and who was prepared, and when he was going to be called on the next day, he was really going to perform. He had a tremendous love for what he was doing, an infectious sense of humor, a tremendous ability really to share an inside story which he had picked up. You know, Howard mentioned that he is a rooted person, a deeply rooted person. That was the Tim I knew. He loved his family. He talked about Maureen. He talked about Luke. He talked about Big Russ, the stories. He talked about the school, the high school he went to up there. He talked about the church. You know, we'd get together often on when we come up there for those Tuesday nights with you fellas. And he would come on the set, and I'd be on there with Barnacle, and he would start off picking up some part of the altar boys' liturgy, and we would have to pick up on it. And he remembered that, and you could tell he was a man that loved where he came from and who he was and the people he came from. And I think he saw himself as really someone who was representing them when he reached the heights that he did. Clearly, he's a giant of American journalism. You know, we hear that statement often, that an institution is but the lengthened shadow of a single man. Meet the Press today is a lengthened shadow of Tim Russert. You know, I was on the other side during the 90s when I was a candidate a number of times, and you always knew you were going into the batter's box against the best. I would be down there in the library here rather than go into the green room, so I would be studying. And he would come in smiling, and how are you doing, Pat? And you're debating so-and-so, tell you a story or two or something that was up. And then you would go in there, and he threw them hard. He didn't throw them at your head. He threw them hard and high and hit right down the middle. He was as good and tough a questioner as we've got in this business. He turned Meet the Press into the appointment show on Sunday. And with due respect to our George and to Bob Schieffer, this was the place to be, and this was the show, and it was Tim Russert. And again, when we were back up there in New York, what you got is that infectious sense of humor, the laughter at what's going on and what people are saying. He delighted in politics. He never got stale or weary or cynical about politics. It was always something fresh and exciting, even though I'm sure this is way down the road in the number of campaigns. But he was a very memorable man, an unforgettable man.
Pat, well put as always. You mentioned, and I had read those statements from George Stephanopoulos and from Bob Schieffer, that this is not just a loss in terms of television to the NBC family, acute and reverberating even as it is for us, but also for all of television, all of journalism.